It bewilders me how one man destroyed French Scrabble despite being unable to speak it. This man is Nigel Richards, regarded as the greatest Scrabble player ever. He has the highest recorded rank, point score average, and won the most Scrabble competitions in English. As a psychology student interested in how people learn, it makes sense that Nigel became successful because he spent decades honing the skill. But he won the French Scrabble tournament twice, and only spent 6 weeks to prepare. Even with my vast array of notes, and with how extensive it is, I can only guess how he achieved such a feat because he has not disclosed how he learns. I can disclose some possible methods from cognitive psychology about how he could have achieved this feat with such little time. Learning a language is one of the most difficult things to learn because it has many complex parts. One needs to understand the correct grammatical and syntactical rules, how to enunciate sounds correctly, how to communicate well with others, and consistently expanding their range of words to improve said communication skills. Nigel, however, did not need to do all of this. As Scrabble only requires words to score points, Nigel only had to focus on memorizing French words. Learning and remembering words is difficult because of how many there are, whereas isolating this part of language makes the learning process less complicated. For Nigel to have assisted himself with making the learning process even less complicated, he likely could have used a concept called chunking. Chunking allows for turning complex information into separate and easily understandable parts. With the French language, Nigel only had to remember words, but to go one step further, he only had to remember individual patterns of letters. In language, the smallest individual part of a word is called a phoneme. Every language, like French, has its own set of individual phonemes used to create whole words. This table is used for French. Nigel could have made a system to recognize these patterns to determine if a word is French or not. With a system that helps identify individual words, the next stage for Nigel would have been learning to remember as many words as he could that are valid in the tournament's dictionary. To increase the likelihood of remembering anything, including words, Nigel could have revised the words to encode or store them in long-lasting memory. In memory, there are 4 different stages. There is short-term, working, long-term, and long-lasting memory. Short-term memory holds temporary information, likely to be forgotten after 30 seconds. Working memory is the conscious process of using a piece of information for a task, which, if used consistently, goes into long-term memory. Long-term memory is where memories are kept to be recalled. However, these 3 forms of memory are subject to decay, where memory is forgotten. Long-lasting memory prevents forgotten memories, achieved through consistent practice over many years. Nigel, however, did not practice French for very long, but what he could resort to was using his learning experience. As Nigel had won multiple Scrabble tournaments in English, he could transfer this experience to help recall words for French. A notable example of Nigel during his experience in English Scrabble was documented by a YouTuber named Will Anderson. In his video, Only the Goat Could Make the Scrabble Challenge, he talks about how Nigel made a challenge that is regarded as the most famous in the game's history. For those unfamiliar, and a rule refresher for those who know already, a player can challenge a word that was just played before they start their turn. If the played word is not in the competition's respected dictionary, the challenged player has to return their tiles and lose that turn. If the word is acceptable, the challenger loses their next turn instead. In this video, Anderson recounts that the game Nigel was playing would determine if he would win his first tournament. In this tournament deciding match, Nigel's opponent played the word sulfitic. A specific dictionary had to be checked to know if a word's spelling could be used in an English Scrabble competition. In this case, the Merriam-Webster dictionary for an American tournament. The Merriam-Webster dictionary contains multiple spellings of sulfur and its derivatives, all except this version of sulfitic. This spelling is only seen in another dictionary not used in the competition, the Collins Dictionary. This successful challenge gave Nigel the leeway to win that match and the tournament. Will Anderson concludes that Scrabble masters spend their lives revising only one dictionary, meaning that for Nigel to know this different spelling, he would have memorized both dictionaries to recognize different letter patterns or spellings of this same word. He likely could have used this instance as a framework to recognize different words in other languages, like French. Everything I have described thus far is tangible, but the last part of understanding how Nigel could have learned French effectively is less tangible, because it is in the domain of theory. Specifically, unconscious thought theory. Unconscious thought theory is the idea that the mind continues to work even if one is unaware of it. The mind, for the most part, implicitly thinks of many different possibilities or choices. This theory has different components or principles than Nigel could have implicitly used when learning and using French words for a tournament. The principle most applicable to Nigel is called the weighting principle. The weighting principle is the idea that the unconscious can be more reliable than the conscious when overwhelmed with information. While relying on implicit thinking may lead to its own mistakes, it can be resorted to as an alternative if one is only trying to brute force letter combinations under stress. Nigel has likely done this in competitions, because he has said himself that he does not mind so much about how a game ends. His calmness likely allows him to optimize his memory and recall different letter combinations for words without trying so hard. His experience with being calm in English Scrabble games is thus transferable to French, allowing him to easily recall many different French words, despite how many there were, and how they were all foreign to him. Despite the language being foreign to him, Nigel Richards still won the French Scrabble tournament twice, with only a little prep time. Given the terms described throughout this video, the idea of winning a Scrabble tournament in a language Nigel did not know initially seemed impossible, but now appears more plausible. What is useful about using chunking and relying on experience from something similar is that this can be applied to anything, not just Scrabble. It is liberating that Nigel can destroy French Scrabble, because this case study shows that anyone can learn anything, so long that the process is well organized. This was how Nigel Richards destroyed French Scrabble twice. This was an Orange Chair Written Work number 10.